The night I returned to that house, everything smelled the same. Fresh lilies in the hallway, faint perfume on the staircase railing, and the quiet hum of the chandelier lights. It was strange how memories can hold a scent, even after years of silence. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed the old code on the front door keypad. 0426. My birthday. She hadn't changed it. That was the first surprise. The door clicked open, slow and reluctant, like even it remembered what she had done to me. Inside, laughter floated from the living room. Her laughter. The same soft, graceful tone that once made everyone believe she was pure gold. But I knew better now. Because 2 years ago, that same voice destroyed me. I still remember the morning she framed me, how the phone rang, how my father's voice broke, how my mother's eyes avoided mine, how my sister stood there, pretending to cry, while I was forced to leave everything behind. And tonight, I was back. Not to shout, not to fight, but to end the story she began. Some debts aren't settled with revenge, they're settled with truth. I took a deep breath, stepped inside, and whispered to myself, let her see what honesty looks like when it finally returns home. Because this time, I wasn't the little sister she could silence. This time, she would face everything she made me lose. I grew up in a house where the days were measured in deliveries, fabric rolls, and the soft click of my mother's measuring tape. Our family business started in the guest room, with 2 machines and my father's careful handwriting on brown ledgers. We were not rich then, but we were steady. My sister, Rhea, learned to smile for the camera before I learned to balance a spreadsheet. She was the face, the charm, the one the press wanted. I was the quiet one in the back room, building the skeleton that made the body stand. On most mornings, I woke before everyone else. I liked the sound of the kettle and the way the house echoed when it was empty. The studio sat at the end of the corridor, with wide windows that turned every button into a small thing of gold. Rhea would join later, yawning, robe tied at the waist, hair up in a loose knot that looked casual only because it took 10 minutes to make. She would lean over the cutting table and say, "You have magic hands," and I would feel warm for the rest of the day. We called the brand Ivory and Thread. It began with simple linen sets, then silk pieces that made the city take notice. Rhea could make anything seem like a secret you wanted to buy. I wrote the emails, balanced vendor payments, optimized shipping routes, and built the inventory system from scratch. She handled photo shoots, influencer calls, pop-ups, and all the places where eyes and ears gather. Together, we were the promise our parents had worked for, or so it seemed. There is a style to a well-run small business. Shared calendars, hurried lunches, a soft panic before launches, and the quiet pride the morning after. On Fridays, we ate samosas in the warehouse and counted pre-orders. Rhea would sit on a stack of cartons and say, "We're going to be huge, just wait." My father would nod, rubbing his thumb along a column of figures. My mother would tell us not to lose ourselves in ambition. And I would think, this is our real-life story, and it is good. Even back then, there were little moments that didn't fit. Nothing big, just small catches in the fabric. A customer email marked resolved that I had never seen. A supplier who refused my call but answered hers. A photo shoot where my design notes were strangely missing, so we styled an entire line with the wrong belts. Rhea made a show of taking the blame, "My mistake, everyone," and then hugged me in front of the team. People clapped, I smiled. I also printed a second copy of my notes and kept it in my desk after that. Rhea was beautiful in the kind of way that makes other people think of perfection. She had a way of standing that made even silence look like an intentional pose. Crowds loved her, so did the camera. When we did our first televised segment, the host called me the younger assistant. Rhea laughed softly and corrected him. "She's my sister and our operations lead." But later in the car, she said,
You know media. They won't remember functions, only faces. She smiled, and I told myself she meant no harm. We divided the worlds between us. I handled systems, she handled storytelling. It worked because we trusted each other. It worked because we told ourselves the same bedtime story every night, that family means safety, that we were two sides of the same heart. Sometimes, though, I noticed how praise changed the shape of the room. When a consultant said my cost optimization saved 3 months of runway, Rhea's eyes flashed for a second, quick and private. Later, she joked, "You and your sheets and formulas, maybe you should marry Excel." We laughed. It was easier to laugh. I remember one launch party with painful clarity. The venue had high ceilings and good acoustics. Even whispers felt expensive. Our new line hung like quiet music on the racks. Rhea gave a speech about beginnings. People looked at her and forgot to blink. When she pulled me on stage, the audience clapped and someone shouted, "We love the designs." Rhea squeezed my hand and leaned into the microphone. "She's our little genius," she said, smiling at me, but speaking to them. Little. It was nothing, a single word, a soft tap on the shoulder. But words can be careful knives. I let the applause wash over me and tried not to bleed. Family dinners often felt like tiny board meetings with better lighting. My father asked about margins. My mother kept track of how many nights we didn't sleep. Rhea would scroll through her phone under the table, sending a DM, planning a collaboration, chasing a glow. Once, when I mentioned drafting a formal partnership agreement, my father said, "Soon. It's all in the family." Rhea looked up then, just a glance, and smiled. "Who needs contracts when you have blood?" she said lightly. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but something inside me counted the seconds before the conversation changed. We were upper middle class now. Success rearranged the furniture and added a security camera at the gate. We hired a driver for late nights. My parents remodeled the kitchen and built a small prayer room. Our studio moved out of the house into a proper space with skylights and a reception desk that reflected everyone's face when they walked in. Rhea loved walking past that reflection. She would check her posture and say, "We are building a world." I believed her. I also noticed how often she archived emails from lawyers about equity structures without looping me in. Once, an investor invited us to lunch. He praised our growth and asked about future plans. Rhea did most of the talking. She was practiced, precise, elegant. I added the numbers and timelines, the operational backbone. The investor said, "You two are perfect together." On the drive back, Rhea placed her head on the window and whispered, "Let's never let anyone come between us." It sounded like love. It also sounded like a rule. At the office, we used Slack like everyone else. Rhea had a private channel with the creative team that I wasn't in. "Too many cooks," she said when I asked. I let it go because the garments were still beautiful and the shipment still left on time. But then sample costs started creeping up while order accuracy slipped. When I flagged the mismatch, she kissed my forehead and said, "You worry too much. Trust the process." That night, I stayed late and ran a quiet audit. I found 3 duplicate vendor entries in a courier contract I hadn't approved. I told myself growth is messy. I had told myself to be patient. Our childhood was simple. Rhea taught me how to line my eyes in a single stroke. I taught her how to write an email that gets the response you want. She shielded me from unkind friends. I fixed her Wi-Fi and changed her passwords when she forgot them. When we fought, it was about clothes or the last piece of cake. We always made up before sleep. It's important to remember this part. In every emotional story, the ruin later makes a reader forget there was once joy. But we had joy. We had laughter that became the room. The first time I saw my designs reposted on a competitor's page, tagged as their inspiration, I felt a hard cold in my stomach. I traced the leak. It didn't point anywhere clear, just a few timestamps, a shared Google Drive folder, and a file that had been viewed during hours when only Rhea and I had access. I asked her gently, careful not to accuse, She got very still and said, "Are you suggesting I would steal from us?" The question sat between us like a loaded table. I stepped back. "No, of course not," I said quickly. "I'm just trying to understand." She hugged me and whispered, "Then understand that I would never hurt you." I believed her because I needed to. Occasionally, my mother would look at us with worry and say, "Don't let the world turn you against each other." We always promised. Then we would drive to a late shoot, listen to a playlist we both knew by heart, and talk about future showrooms. Plans can be a kind of glue. They can also hide cracks. Social media made everything louder and softer at the same time. People commented like they knew us. We curated behind-the-scenes clips, posted reels with quick cuts, and used captions that sounded like we loved being tired. Rhea dazzled in every frame. I tried once to do a small explainer on how we priced cotton fairly. It got fewer likes than a photo of her laughing on a terrace brunch. She said, "People want to feel, not think. You do the thinking, I'll make them feel." It sounded like a good division of labor, and yet somehow I felt smaller every day. The first time she introduced me as our junior at a buyer's meet, I thought I had misheard. The second time, I smiled and shook hands anyway. Later, she said it was just optics because some rooms listened better when there was only one queen. She said, "It's a game. We win by playing it." I told myself I was not playing. I was building. It is hard to argue with outcomes when numbers are green. Money changes the air around a table. Decisions get quieter. Questions get thinner. When the accountant came by with papers, Rhea signed what was hers with a quick hand. I was always present, but sometimes the documents had already been walked through with her in advance. She would say, "You're the numbers brain, just look them over." And I did. I reviewed, highlighted, and asked questions that got answered in half sentences. We were busy, always busy. Busyness is a wonderful way to avoid difficult talk. Around this time, I started keeping a small notebook in my bag. I wrote down tracking numbers, order mismatches, promises made in meetings. I listed people who suddenly stopped replying to me but answered her in an hour. I told myself it was just good practice. I also told myself that writing things down makes them easier to control. In truth, I think I was trying to protect a version of our life that already existed only in memory. One evening, a courier dropped off a velvet box addressed to the brand. Inside, there was a vintage brooch on loan from a collector, meant for our heritage shoot. I signed for it and placed it in the studio safe. 2 days later, during the shoot, the box was empty. The team stared at me. The photographer made a joke and then stopped when no one laughed. Rhea touched my arm. "Are you sure you locked it?" she asked, voice soft. I said yes. She didn't argue. She just exhaled and told the team to improvise. After everyone left, she sat on the floor, legs folded, and looked at me for a long time. "We can't afford mistakes like this," she whispered. I nodded, throat tight, shame hot and stupid as a child. That night, I didn't sleep. In the morning, the brooch reappeared in the safe as if the night had made it. No explanation, no questions. Rhea smiled and said, "See, you were tired." I laughed, because what else do you do with a mystery that touches your name? There were bright days too. We did a charity show and the hall stood up for us. We launched a bridal line that sold out in 30 hours. My father cried during the toast and pretended it was dust. Rhea and I danced in the office at 1 a.m., socks sliding on tile. She said, "We did it," and I said, "We did," and the music filled every empty space. If you had told me then what she would later do, I would have thrown you out of the room. People say jealousy has a smell. I don't know. I only know that sometimes when someone praised my calm, Rhea's smile cooled 1 degree. When a journalist asked for an interview with both of us, the meeting moved to a date I couldn't make and only she went. She brought back a box of macarons and said, "The reporter was chaotic. You would have hated it." I ate the pistachio one and said nothing. Near the end of that year, my father suggested a family trust to hold the company shares. It was a simple idea, meant to protect us all. The lawyer came, papers were discussed, tea was poured twice. Rhea sat near the window and let the light paint her like a saint. When the lawyer asked about percentages, my parents said, "Equal." Rhea crossed her legs and smiled politely, and for the first time, I saw something hard pass behind her eyes. It was there for only a heartbeat. Then it was gone. She said, "Of course, equal." The room moved on. At the office, a junior designer began copying how I organized the sampling board. I liked her spirit and complimented her work. A week later, Rhea reassigned the designer to her team. "She needs polishing. You're too gentle. I'll sharpen her." It was probably true. I am gentle. It's not a sin to be soft. But in certain worlds, softness is treated like a weakness waiting to be exploited. That week, 2 of my vendor contacts stopped picking my calls and switched to texting Rhea directly. She told me it was natural, just streamlining. I nodded and let the words slide over me like rain I didn't need to get out of. In this kind of family drama, the gilded cage is made of silk ribbons and printed invoices. You feed it with long hours and high hopes. The bars don't look like bars. They look like routines, successes, public praise, and the love you think can never be used against you. I only recognized the shape of the cage much later, when the door finally shut. A small thing happened on Tuesday that now feels like a siren I didn't hear. We were setting up for a retail pop-up, and a blogger asked for a photo with the founder. She pulled me into the frame, cheerful, and said, "Founders." Rhea stepped between us, laughing lightly, and guided the blogger's arm around her shoulder. "Just me for this one, brand alignment." The blogger apologized. I smiled and stepped aside. It was so clean, so smooth, so normal. We moved on. But something thin and sharp slid under the door that day. At home, my mother saved newspaper clippings about us. She slipped them into clear folders like we were butterflies that needed preserving. One evening, she said, "Promise me you will always protect each other." We promised, because promises are easy when the world still looks whole. My father bought us both identical pens engraved with our initials. For signing big deals, he said. Rhea held hers like a wand. I held mine like a vow. In those months, if you had asked me to describe my life, I would have said it was full, busy, blessed, and honest. I would have said that we were building something that would last. I would have told you that I trusted my sister with my name. I might have even laughed at the idea that anything could change the way we looked at each other. I see now that this was the most fragile part of the story. The belief that love alone could hold everything in place. The last evening before everything started to crack, we stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sky was a slow bruise. Rhea leaned on the railing and said, "We're almost there." I asked, "There where?" She smiled without looking at me. "Where the world finally knows who we are."